What's up, y'all? This is your girl, Coach NaQuandra, and we are back with this good book. It's not the good book, but it is a good book. Think Ahead. And we are on gem number 2. The video is gem number 2 of part 1, chapter 1. And when I say this chapter was good, got me all the way together a few times. So the title of this chapter is called I Will Be Ready. Remember in part 1 in the introduction, it says people don't typically plan. Okay, I'm not going to say typically. People don't plan to have a horrible life and make poor decisions, but we don't plan not to have a horrible life, or we don't plan not to make terrible decisions. So the book is about deciding ahead of time what you're going to do, what you're not going to do, so that you can always be intentional about making good decisions, so that you're not, walking around with a bunch of shoulda, coulda, wouldas, getting over this decision fatigue as well. So I want to start off with this first. Okay, run it back. Let me say this the right way. It says, no one plans to mess up their lives. The problem is they don't plan not to. Okay? No one plans to mess up their lives. The problem is that you don't plan not to mess up your life. I did not plan not to mess up. Okay? And so, again, this book is about pre-decision, planning ahead of time to overcome fear, anxiety, and overwhelm that causes us to run into these situations where we find our lives messed up. So, the title of part 1 or chapter 1 is called The Man in the Mirror, and it's all about self reflection. Again, it's the chapter is called I Will Be Ready. Part 1 is called The Man in the Mirror, and it's about self reflection. So, I want to talk about this first part that I learned a new word or term, or whatever you want to call it. It's called false guilt. I was like, wait a minute, false guilt is a thing? So this is how it was introduced. It says, if you feel guilty because you were tempted, you noticed an attractive person jogging down the street, you considered lying to your boss about why you were 15 minutes late on Zoom call, you really wanted to eat your kids' Halloween candy, that is false guilt. You don't need to feel bad because it's not a sin to be tempted. So he's talking about how you have these thoughts to do things that you know aren't necessarily good, and you feel bad because you're having the thoughts, but you did not actually act on it. And so he's saying that is a type of false guilt. And I was like, wait, I didn't even know that was a thing. But I find myself feeling guilty about things that thoughts that I have, situations that I find myself tempted in, and just beating myself up, self-condemnation. And the word says there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. But anyway, false guilt is the feeling of guilt or shame that's not based on wrongdoing or personal values, but rather on fear of disapproval. It can be self-destructive and harmful to relationships with yourself, others, and God, because you are already condemning yourself. You're already beating yourself up about something that you didn't even do. You thought about doing it, right? And then it talks in the book about how Jesus was tempted on a mountain. He was tempted, yet he did not sin. So there is no sin in you being tempted. The sin happens when you give in to the temptation. Come here. Okay? I said, oh, free me now. I said, oh, free me now, because I be beating myself up. I really beat myself up, and I have a lot of thoughts. You get mad at somebody, and then you thinking about stuff in your head. You're like, what you gonna say back? Then you rehearsing the event in your head. And I'm like, Lord, I need to stop thinking about this. Da, 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 da. I didn't do it, but I'm thinking about it, and I'm beating myself up because I'm thinking about it. Okay? So that's false guilt. Have you ever experienced that? Are you a victim or a person who suffers from false guilt? And then he goes in to talk about the funnel of temptation. The whole time I'm reading that, I'm like, I thought this was supposed to be about making decisions, not about Jesus. But this book has got Jesus all up in it. So it's just even better. But so he talks about the funnel of temptation, like the process of how temptation works and flips us or causes us to walk right into the trap of sin. So he says the funnel of temptation starts with a thought. And I'm going to tell y'all right after I read this part about the funnel of temptation, I gave in to temptation. And then I come to read this book and I was like, oh my God, that literally just happened to me. So it says it starts with a thought, of course, because every reason to or not to do something starts in your mind. And then it says step two is then we start to imagine. Let me see if I can find it in this book. Then we start to imagine. So we think about the thing, and then we start to imagine what it will be like if we engaged in it. If we tried it, the fun we would have, the way it would taste, the laughter, the temporary happiness that we would experience from doing the things. We start to imagine what would take place. And then after the imagination happens, then we start to justify, well, it's not going to be, that bad. Everybody else is doing it. So and so is doing it too. It's not really that deep. So that's when you start to justify the thought, even though you know you shouldn't be doing it. You start to justify it in step three, and then step four, you give in and you do it. So 4 steps in the funnel of temptation. Starts with a thought, then we start to imagine it happening, then we start to justify why we need to do it, and then we do it, right? And the author, Craig G, is saying, little do we know, or little do we catch on to the fact that we can stop this funnel from getting to its end point at step one when we have the initial thought. Now, let me tell y'all what I did. So every morning I go to the Every morning I go to Starbucks. Sorry, client messaged me. But every morning I go to Starbucks and I drink my coffee, I read, journal, whatever, have devotion, whatever. I'm over there, getting my day started. And I recently gave myself a hard line. Don't get anything but coffee when you get there. Nothing. Okay? It's just coffee and to sit down and mind your business. And this particular morning, I was like, I think I'm going to have me a cheese Danish while I was driving there. And I began to imagine the cheese Danish. Then I began to justify, well, I haven't had one all week. I've been doing good all week. And after the justification, I get in that store. And mind you, in my mind, I didn't make up my mind to break or go over the line that I drew for myself. I didn't decide that yet, but I was justifying it. And so when I went in the store, I gave in. I said, let me get my small black coffee and a warm cheese Danish. And so after I got that, I started reading this and I was like, oh my gosh, I literally just went through that whole cycle. And that brings me to this point. He says, your willpower will wane and wear out. And to wane means to become weaker in strength or influence. So we tend to think that we're stronger than what we really are. And then he says that is pride, first of all. I was like, oh my God, that's pride. But he was like, that is pride. And you rely on your limited willpower and ultimately you fall. Because it says, I can do all things through Christ who what? Strengthens me. So when we try to do things in our own strength, we fall and we stumble. And so again, it says your willpower will wane, which means to become weaker in strength or influence and wear out. So we can't be trying to do things in our own strength. We need to identify when we start having the thought of something that will push us over the line to make a irrational or stupid decision, we need to break the thought at conception. And that funnel of temptation, it starts on page 18. Okay? It starts on page 18. All right, so moving right along, this is one thing that I wrote down for me. I said, it's not that I am strong enough to overcome temptation. It's going to be because I'm prepared to not give into it when it presents itself. Not because I'm strong, but because I'm prepared to not give into it, because I can identify when my mind is starting to go in this cycle, when my thoughts are starting to swirl and I'm going into imagining things and I'm going into justifying the yes, and then I'm in the place where I'm about to fall into the pit, the trap of temptation. It's not because I'm going to be strong enough to break this cycle, but it's going to be because I'm prepared by doing the work to not give in when it presents itself. So then next gem. Y'all got it. If you don't have this book yet, you need to get the book. And if you got the book and you haven't started reading it, start reading it. Okay. So part 3 in this book is called Move the Line. The line is the line of boundary. He's talking about we need to move this boundary line as far away from us as possible, so that it's very, 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 very unlikely that you would cross the line. So let me give you an example from the book in which he pulls it from the Bible. He uses the story of Samson. Samson knew not that he was not supposed to be with women outside of his faith, and he also knew that he could not cut his hair. But he had a thorn or a soft spot for his girl. What was her name? What is her name? He had Delilah. He had a soft spot for Delilah. He had a attraction, a love, a desire, a lust for Delilah. And so he played on that line ever so, like, just tapping over it, because he wasn't supposed to be with her anyway. She wasn't of the same faith as him. He wasn't supposed to be messing with her anyway. And then she began to play around, not play around, but try to manipulate him with asking him, what makes you so strong? And tell me what. And then every time he told her something, she would try to do the thing to take away his strength. Yet and still, he continued to play with the line. And she kept poking and prying at him, ultimately wearing him down to the point where he's like, all right, fine, it's my hair. It's my hair. And so she cut the man's hair off and he lost his strength. And then it made this so plain, because then they gouged his eyes out. Like, they took the man's eyes out of his head. Okay. And so he tiptoed on that line, doing things that he knew he should not have been doing. And so we need to make sure we push that line as far away from us as possible. So, two questions that I got. I'm not sure if the author said this or if this, I think he said this, but when deciding where your line is, two questions you need to answer concerning the thing that continuously tempts you is what is acceptable and what's unacceptable. And that's going to help you identify where the line is. Okay. This is good. And so he talks about the line and how some people may refute it because it may seem restrictive, like, oh, I can't go and do this, I can't go and do that. And so he used the analogy of a freight train, of how he said nobody looks at a train and says, oh, this train is so restricted because it can only stay on this one rail. But that rail is the place of that train's efficiency. That is that train's purpose. Its purpose is to stay on that rail. And if it ever comes off the rail, it is purposeless. So I wrote that boundaries are not a restriction, but to help me move progressively in my lane as God planned, just like the train. It's not about desires, it is about my purpose. So, the boundary that you are setting for yourself is not to say you can't do this and you can't do that. It's to help you get further in alignment with your purpose so that you can move progressively. Because when we get fearful and overwhelmed and overly emotional, we make decisions that cause delay in our destiny and our purpose. We get decision fatigue, and so we start making decisions based off convenience and not purpose. Does that make sense? This is good. This is good. So that part three, move the line. And then the last part we'll talk about is magnifying the cost. And that is part four. Yeah, we'll talk about magnifying the cost. And simply that means get really dramatic about what is going to happen if you cross this line. When we talk about what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, what's going to happen if you keep giving into the things that are not acceptable, right? Like Samson, the worst of the worst happened to him. He lost his strength, and they gouged his freaking eyes out. And ultimately, he ended up dying. I mean, he went out with a bang, but he ended up dying. His life, because he was cut, his element was cut, because he was out of purpose, right? He was put in a vulnerable position and ended up dying. And so magnify the cost. For me, what's the worst of the worst that could happen if you continue to impulsively spend? One of my things was embarrassment. I talk about my friends about this. Like when it's time for me to get married, and if my husband look at my finances the way they are, I'm gonna be embarrassed. I'm gonna be like, this is what I got. This is what I got, and it would be embarrassing. What's another thing? Magnifying the cost. I'm always gonna be making ends meet at the end of the month. What else is another thing? Always feeling delayed. I won't be able to build the systems God wants me. I'm going to continue to be trapped in this fear of money. I won't be able to purchase a home or hire a staff. I'm going to always have shame. Nobody's going to trust me anymore. I'm always going to be in a poverty cycle. Like, what? Magnify the cost of you continuously giving in to this temptation that continues to present itself to you. And that will give you something to ponder on, to think about when the opportunity comes up for you to give into the sin. So, listen, I'll tell you one example that the author came up with when it comes to magnifying the cost. He talks about David. David, when he was on the roof looking at Bathsheba, being a peeping Tom, and then invited her over, and then ended up, having to, not even having to, but deciding to kill her husband. Okay, so it says in the moment he was probably thinking, I'll have her over, we'll just talk, it'll help us pass up time, and she's probably lonely with her husband at war, she'll be pleasant. So this is him justifying his reasoning for calling her over. And then so he goes in to say, but the moment before, he could have asked himself, what could go wrong, what is the worst case scenario, and what if it really happens. And if he did, he might have realized that they could end up having sex. He could wreck Bathsheba's life. She could get pregnant. He could attempt to cover up the affair by killing the innocent husband. His staff could see the sin and question his devotion to God. His military leaders could find out and damage his integrity. Like magnify, like these are the worst case scenarios in which these things happen. Some of these things happen in his exercise of what if David magnified the cost if he gave into his sin. Some of these things did happen, but that's the same thing we need to do when we are being tempted to make decisions that are unfavorable to our lives. Bye, Jaden. And so then it goes into part 5, plan your escape, and then it ends with your weak spot. And so the purpose of this chapter is to get you with your self-reflection and getting you, thinking ahead, like what, let's see. It's law. You see the little clip on the side? You gotta lift it up. No, on the door handle. You see a little lever? So with that being said, is it 7:30? No. With that being said, it starts off with a prudent person foresees danger and takes precaution. The simpleton goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. And so this chapter is about us learning to be prudent with our decision making, what we do, why we do it, and how we do it. Because a prudent person foresees this danger and takes precaution, but a simpleton goes in blindly and suffers the consequences. So if we can be prudent and anticipate dangers ahead and plan ahead of time how we are going to handle these dangers, then we can be better prepared for our future to come. I don't know if I said this in the last gem, but our life is not made up of a bunch of big moments. Every decision we make is a decision toward what the outcome of our life would be. The author mentioned someone else in the book who said, every decision we make is a vote into your future life. It's a vote into the outcome of your future in life. So just remember that these small wins, these small missteps that you take are all accounting toward what the outcome of your life will be, what the outcome of your goal will be. Whether your goal is to run a successful business, your goal may be to birth and grow a ministry, your goal may be to birth and grow some healthy children. Whatever your goal is, the decisions that you're making now in this moment, the moments to come tomorrow, whether big or small, are all votes into the outcome of your future. You see how we just had our presidential election and they had to win a certain amount of electoral votes from each state to determine the outcome or the vote for that state. So let's say North Carolina had 10 electoral votes. That's not true. I don't know how many we got. But let's say that North Carolina had 10 and 7 went to Donald Trump and the rest of them went to, what's her name, Kamala. And so the outcome of that would be the winner, or the winner for North Carolina would be Donald Trump because he got most of the votes. And so think about it that way. And then there's 50 other states and how all of that plays out. Just kind of reflect on that, how that relates to your life, these decisions, these little, you looking at the big state, but what made up the big state are the little electoral votes that were giving per collection of voters. That makes sense. So your life, not based on the big wins, the big losses, but every single step. And again, it's not about restricting you to in life. It's not about causing you to shrink back, but it's about helping you, us, me, okay, helping you to be purposeful. And so making decisions that are that wield a negative impact. You may have gotten something in the moment. You may have gotten some instant gratification in the moment from buying that cheese Danish, from getting that French fry at Chick-fil-A. You might have had some sort of instant gratification from fussing that person out in the moment. But what about the bigger picture? What about your actual purpose in life? What about the ultimate assignment that you're working on right now? It's about that moment. It's about that thing. Okay. So I hope that from listening to these gems and reading the book that you are becoming more future focused, purpose focused, and also self reflecting, right? Like really looking in yourself and seeing what needs to be addressed, what needs to be changed, what am I doing good, what am I not doing good. When it comes to moving the line, identifying where the line is, moving it far away as possible, and then magnifying the cost. So I hope that this was encouraging, insightful, power packed, entertaining, because the book is good. This is good. So if you haven't bought it already, get it off of Amazon. If you're not in a place where you can buy the book yet, just keep listening to these gems because I'm going to share as much as I can. Thank you so much for listening. Look, I done tore up my camera, and I'll be talking to you soon.